Okay, Teddy Host, thank you so much for coming back on to Talk Belief. So how are things there in San Francisco?
Things are pretty good. It's pretty warm and it's another nice day.
Teddy, people will remember you not only from our previous interview, but for the 2 episodes of A&E's very popular documentary, Cults and Extreme Belief, which looked at cults such as Children of God, Nation of Islam, and also the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies, of course.
Yeah.
And you were born into the Unification Church, weren't you? So,
right.
And you knew some of Moon's family. So before we start, can you give a brief overview of what the church believes in and who the principal figures are?
Sure. So the Unification Church is basically, it's a Christian-based extreme religion. It was started by Sun Myung Moon, who was born in what is now North Korea, back, I believe, in the 40s or 50s, I think. Yeah. And he claimed to be the second coming of Christ. So, you know, his words were absolutely true. Everyone else is wrong. So at the heart of it, and I think at the heart of the Christian faith is the belief that, you know, Adam and Eve, the first humans on earth, were, they sinned in the Garden of Eden. So they were cast out, and humanity was born out of that sinful relationship. So what Sun Myung Moon claims is that he came back to basically cleanse us of that sin. So anyone who joins their children who are born into it through this or that ritual, as long as they're a church member, they have sinless children. So we have no original sin. And so what that means for us is that if we were to have a sexual relationship with anyone or have the act of sex with anyone outside of the church, we were back to being original sinners or of the original sin lineage. So yeah, that was used basically to keep us in. It was the final straw, you know, like as long as you believe that, you had to stick with the program. And you know, it wasn't until I talked to some people I realized how common that's kind of used in other religions to keep people in the faith and keep people under control, basically. So so that's it. Yeah, some of the I guess the rituals that stood out were like the mass weddings. Sun Myung Moon would marry a bunch of people at a stadium. Let's see, Lisa Cohn, who is someone who grew up in the Unification Church. Her parents joined actually well after she was born. She goes into that a bit too, talking about the mass weddings. And also with that was the matching, where Sun Myung Moon would match couples together. And later parents actually were allowed to match, I think because, you know, as an insider, like second generation couples who were matched, they didn't really work out. And for the most part, like something like 85% or something of them, they just broke up in that first slew of it when Sun Myung Moon chose their wives or husbands, because I think it's because second generation never chose to be in the church. So they didn't have as much faith in this process. And they were like, what? So like eventually the church let parents choose the matchings. And basically you have to kind of negotiate with your parents. That's kind of what it's come to. Fundraising practices, extreme fundraising, where people were, you know, basically people they would join the church through like a retreat where they were taken away from everyday society and just surrounded by church members who would just, you know, really push them to believe in the church's teachings. And then at the end of these, maybe week-long retreats or so, they'd reveal that the Messiah was Sun Myung Moon. And so from there, a lot of them would just live in a van for years even, and just sell from door to door, just trinkets like keychains or, you know, laser prints or something that looks kind of interesting, to raise money for the church. So that's the fun. That's a lot of the funding of the church. So and people were ripped away from their families, you know, forever. These church members, they were told that their families were sinful, were of the original sin lineage. So,
so they didn't know that Sun Myung Moon was this supposed Messiah. You know, they taking on the mantle of Jesus until later on. Is that right?
They got lured in through, let's say, like a college program where at first, like some church members posing as students, or maybe they were college students, would come up to these church members or these potential church members who were like just students in school or something. And they would say, come to our, what was it? Creative culture workshop or something like that. They give it some kind of vague name. And then, you know, they'd have these people come to a church center and basically build a relationship with them, a friendship. It was basically it was like the beginnings of coercive persuasion. And so these people would then, you know, eventually get more and more into this. And then they'd end up going to the retreat center, which is like usually somewhere in the woods or, you know, just some place that's away from, I guess, the city. And yeah, just get indoctrinated until, you know, they end up in a van just selling door to door and believing that they are doing the work of God and saving the world. I did this for about 1.5 years after high school, which is a common thing, usually like a year or two, or sometimes more. Kids would do these, you know, second generation would do this program, which was basically live in a church center and experience the front line of the church. I did it just kind of more for observational purposes to be like, you know, is this really what I want to do? You know, what's this church about? Or just to get the monkey off my back, really. Be like, all right, I did your thing. I'm going to move on and live my life now. But anyway, I feel like I'm getting into maybe something we might cover later. But yeah, so basically that's the funding source of the church. People, you know, to wrap it all up, to TLDR, it's like rip people away from their families and then put them in a van and have them sell trinkets on the street or door to door to raise money for the church's businesses. So no matter how well the church's businesses are doing, they have a constant funding source of these people who were manipulated and torn from their past lives.
Wow. So you, like we said in the first interview, you were born into it, you lived your life in it, it's all you knew. So how long exactly were you in the church in terms of years? And do you remember that defining moment when you realized that you had to leave?
Yeah, and it was actually a defining moment. So my parents actually, my whole family actually drifted away from the church in the 90s. What happened was in the early 90s, we grew up in New York, my family, until I was 13. Near the Moons, in the same town as the Moons. So I actually, yeah, like you said, I knew some of the Moon family. I wasn't like close friends with any of them because they were all just, you know, a billionaire messianic family. There's no two-way relationship there. So I think some people would hang out with them sometimes, or just like, oh, what an honor that one of the Moons spoke to me. But it was never like, hey, let's hang out all the time. It was like, because they kind of got violent. They were a little scary. And they still are, some of them in their adulthood. We grew up in that kind of that ether, that really concentrated church, you know, ether, since the Moons lived in Tarrytown / Irvington, just kind of right on the border of those towns in New York. And we moved to Bellevue, Washington, because my dad grew up in Seattle. So it was close to Seattle. We moved there solely because someone we told members to go to their father's hometown and to expand the witnessing effort. So but what my parents saw it as, and what I realized that a lot of other parents saw that as, was at least the ones who were maybe more woke, quote unquote, they saw it as a way to retreat from the church or to like back away, especially the older members who got older and wiser and who were kind of more in touch with their critical thinking, were like, well, now that I'm not in New York, I'm not near the headquarters, I can get away and live my own life. So there's a lot of those like kind of veteran type church members in places outside of New York, and especially on the West Coast. I guess maybe it's a little more liberal or whatnot, even though my parents are conservative. But anyway, but there's just that kind of thinking, questioning things. So yeah, my parents drifted away from it through my teens. And then around the time I was 17 or 18, and I had just done that, like one and a half years of that program where you have that frontline church experience. They kind of saw that I was very fueled by the church, and I think they saw it as a red flag, and they sat me down and they just were like, look, we're not, we don't follow this thing with the original sin, blood lineage, whatever. Like, they're like, you can marry whoever you want. And that was like a shocker to me. Like, I wasn't really ready to leave. So for a while, like for years, I was just like, what do I do? Like, my whole childhood, my whole identity, the deepest, most personal parts of who I am were nurtured in this church, So, if anyone comes from a community that is different from what they see around them, they know what that's like and how precious that is. But you don't know how deeply that is rooted in you and how much a part of you that is until you leave it. So I was facing that, and I was just like, what do I do? And I remember my sister was like, we have to save our parents for a while. Like, but she would say that, but then we were like, but really, we didn't know what to do. So, so it took another event for me to really just put my foot down and be like, I don't believe in this anymore. Because that was my parents leaving and me, I was going on my own path. So I remember when I was around 17 or 18, so actually shortly after, like, there was the news of Young Jin, who was Sean Moon's closest brother, who, when I saw him around town as kids, they were never apart. It was always both of them together. They were closest in age in their family, Sean and Young Jin being Sun Myung Moon's youngest sons. He committed suicide in Reno. And so that was like a bit of a shocker. The whole church was talking about it, everything. But what I distinctly remember, it's the way that the church handled it that made me jump ship right away. And I still remember the email. I still remember how it looked. They were, their first reaction was, this is a result of the Japanese and American churches and like other church, groups not having enough faith. And like, basically you did this. And Sun Myung Moon himself and his staff, he used his son's suicide as a way to have more submission out of his members. So I just thought that was absolutely disgusting. Especially I was around the same age as these kids, Young Jin and Sean Moon. So I remember them. Young Jin was actually, Philip Moon is his American name. He was actually like one of the nicer kids. Like there were a few of, we called them the true family. So that's instinctively what I call them. But anyway, the Moon family. A lot of them, some of them were more aggressive and violent than other ones. And Young Jin was one of the better ones. Like he would play Dungeons and Dragons with the kids, and like he was very like melancholy and kind of maybe he had some depression or something. But there was something that was kind of sedated about him, I always noticed. So when I heard that he committed suicide, I was like, maybe he was going through a depressive episode or something like that, But of course, things like depression and mental illness don't really register in, this religious cult. I thought there would be like a moment of silence or something for him, like, hey, let's talk about Young Jin, the person. But no, it was just used as propaganda. And I was just so shocked and so disgusted, that Sun Myung Moon would use his own child. This is me speaking in defense of the Moon family, ironically, but really just treating another human being, especially if they're your own son. So I just thought it was disgusting, and I was done. So that was it.
Wow. So what about people within the second generation of the Unification Church that you grew up in? I mean, were there any other cases of depression or suicide that you know of? And do you think that this is a big problem in cults in general?
I think the bigger conversation is kind of mental illness in society and how we treat that in America, at least. This is the only country I've ever lived in, so I'll speak on behalf of that. I think a lot of people join groups, religious groups or other, any kind of community that just seems really accepting when they don't feel accepted. And I think a lot of people who are mentally ill don't feel accepted. Maybe they don't, the ebb and flow isn't there with the rest of society. They can't keep up with things in a certain way, or they're just in a different headspace, My brother and I were diagnosed with ADHD. Some people joke about it, like we all have ADHD. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I think of it, but I do know that I have always been spaced out. It did make my grades suffer while my other siblings got like straight A's. So I knew there was something that was wrong with my focus, whether it was a traumatic incident or nurtured in me, I don't know. But yeah, so I think a lot of mentally ill people or people who are just kind of offbeat in one way or another will join these groups that are just opening their doors because they're looking to expand their membership. So, and then you have kids and kids who have like mentally ill parents who just have never been diagnosed or who haven't like processed that or it hasn't been treated. And that's dangerous. And so I do know of some other, unfortunately, some suicides. You know, I can't just automatically connect it with that reason. You know, who knows what these people's experienced in their lives or what their home lives were like. But usually it's been the case of like, for example, like love. I mean, some people just in the Unification Church, there's no such thing as like heartbreak or divorce. Just everything's, there's these very perfectionistic demands. So
that would be very stressful, wouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So I know of one person who, because of heartbreak, he killed himself, and it's just really sad. I barely knew this guy either. I maybe met him once, and you know, I remember I was telling my sister about it because word went around to people who grew up in the church, and like I was almost in tears because because I knew I know what that's like to like just. I mean, I didn't know what his life was like, and I didn't know. I'd heard that maybe he had a parent who was maybe had experiencing some kind of mental illness, but you know, I just to not have the tools to feel so alone in like heartbreak and to not really know how to talk about it with your own family and with like the closest people in your life. Like we're really on our own, you know, second generation, when we have to find love and like, you know, deal with her. Like I had to ask my college friends. I had to make a new support group in my life. I can go to my family for some things, you know, there's still some very basic fundamental things. When it comes to like kind of modern social living and relationships, it's a hard thing to approach when you have a very indoctrinated family and from this old world church. I mean, you know, it's not something I don't cut off with them. We all grew up. Me and my siblings are pretty close, but I think we all kind of know we have to discover our own way. And I can't even imagine what it's like to grow up in a family without that pressure of just growing up being taught one thing and then having to live in a society that is totally like you're supposed to resist it and you're supposed to not trust it. And then, but suddenly you're like, oh, wait, I am supposed to trust this society if I want to survive in it. And then, so you don't know what to bring back home to your, you know, to your family and to your tribe or whatever, you know? So anyway, yeah, but definitely, you know, I think undiagnosed mental illness for sure, just loneliness and just the culture shock of growing up in the Unification Church versus the world that you were taught was wrong. And that, you know, a lot of us get diagnosed with PTSD. And, you know, I feel so lucky to have found a therapist who specializes in cults. And, you know, I'm just finding in every session, just waking up to new things that, you know, weren't as autonomous to me as maybe the average person. And that's what I'm looking for. And I know I can never have that. Like, I can work on things. I can never be, you know, like someone who grew up normally in society, but I can also turn that into like an interesting story and as a writer and an artist. And that's what I'm doing. That's how I kind of deal with it, you know, and try to like bank from that experience. And I know not everyone, no one's perfect. You know, everyone has their quirks, but so these are mine and I'm trying to make something positive out of it. So
do you find that helps you, the art and the cartoons that you do, that helps, that expression helps sort of channel all these pent up emotions? And
yeah, absolutely. I'm constantly trying to think, like, how can I turn my story, or the story of the Unification Church upbringing, into one that is relatable, you know, across the board. You know, we do have this divide in America right now, this strong political polarization, and you know, it has everything to do with people who are in situations like my own, or people who grew up in the Westboro Baptist Church, or just, you know, hardcore Republican, like just first hardcore Democrat, whatever. Like, you know, there's just this very polarized thinking. But I also really like comedy. Like, I grew up for most of my childhood in New York, and I've always loved comedy. I grew up with shows like In Living Color and like Saturday Night Live, you know. That was always my way of dealing with it. I've always been kind of into comedy, and that's the language I speak. If I'm on a dating app or something and I'm chatting with someone, we're just going to be trading jokes, and that's how I know we're going to get along, you know?
Yeah. Laughter, the best medicine, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it also, to me, just looking into it over the years, it's, and I have done stuff like stand-up comedy. I've done, you know, improv, taken improv classes, sketch comedy classes. I want to do something in that field, just something. So I'm really looking for that, that combination of like cult life and comedy. I'm like, there's a lot of potential there. So,
would you recommend that to anyone who's watching, who's perhaps leaving a cult, transitioning, or been out, struggling a bit? Not necessarily just comedy, but this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Amy, who was in the Children of God episode of the A&E Cults and Extreme Belief, and she was saying how she was into comedy. You know, she's down in LA, she's probably surrounded by it. So I think me, growing up, first half of my childhood in New York, that really seeped in. It was always just an escape, you know, just watching TV. And to me, going to school was terrifying because I knew that everyone knew about the Moonies, and you know, a lot of my energy in school was just like trying to hide that. Here was me, this half Asian kid who's probably obviously in the church, but I was like, I can't, you know, like I just felt really crippled socially in school, except with, of course, my other Mooney friends or other dorks who like just didn't count as people. You know, that was me and my group. You know, we could just hide because no one was paying attention to us.
Right, Teddy. We mentioned at the top of the interview about politics that came into it, and you've been out of the Moonies for a while now, and things are more or less getting back to normal for you, but your life is still affected in a lot of ways. So how, for instance, has being in the cult shaped your political views?
The church was a far-right extreme. It was a political group as much as it was a religious group. And if you look at a lot of like far-right political groups, they're based in like extreme Christianity or fundamentalism. So, you know, basically they're in that same camp. So I feel like I know that world, and I know people in that sphere. And for that reason, I actually don't dismiss them and the way they think and the things they trust and everything. If you grew up in an extreme group, you know, I think it would, I can't imagine that anyone would just look at extreme groups after that and like completely just shun them. I think that's counterproductive. I think the more productive way to approach that would be to speak their language, you know, just be like, I know you believe Jesus or God or whatever, you know, like, I remember growing up and feeling like those were precious, exclusive things that everyone should experience in their lives. But, you know, I read a few books and read about history of religions and everything, and you realize that it can be limiting because depending on how you were taught or what you were taught, it can be limiting in that it becomes a brand, and like you only accept information that comes through this brand. And, you know, that's so, and then you look out the window from living that life at people who are having fun and who are just more carefree. And, you know, I think that's what pulls a lot of people out. They're like, well, what are they doing different from me? Like, I'm not as happy as that. And it's kind of envy, but it's also kind of a desire to grow and explore. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, what I see politics as is that it seems like there's a group of people who believe in that there are answers out there, and that, you know, we need to just focus on those black and white answers, you know, and that's the extremists. And then there's other people who are like, we don't know the answers, and we're looking for that. And we need to trust each other and work with each other to find those answers. And so that's kind of what I see, you know, more on the left. I don't like to talk about partisan politics. I don't like the idea that people have to choose a side. You know, I think that's, I'd rather just talk about the issues, you know, like stop pointing to the book's cover and start like pointing to quotes in the book. You know, that's what I'm more concerned about. So like, yeah, I listen to podcasts that are kind of on the fence, like Joe Rogan podcasts. There's a layer of media, there's a layer of marketing that colors everything red or blue. And, you know, we're not going to get anywhere if we just focus on that. We need to focus on the issues, and like, you know, we can agree to disagree. We can be people, but let's not just like bop each other on the head and be like, I'm right, you're wrong. Just like, what's the point? Like, what are we getting to? Like, that's the question. So
I remember when I interviewed ex-Scientologist Chris Shelton, I went in expecting a pretty harrowing story, and for the most part it was, but he had some good times within Scientology as well. And so I was just wondering, are there any happy memories that you retain from being in the Unification Church?
Yeah, and that's the hardest part, is I feel like I can't go back there, you know. I can through some friends, but anyway, just when I think of happy memories, yeah, I just think, you know, I mean, it takes a village to raise a child, as they say, and mine was the church. And I think, you know, even though it was a branded experience that was in this, you know, cut off group from society that feared society, I was still, you know, provided with resources and people in my life, and there were smiles and events and games and, you know, other kids I grew up with in communal type housing before maybe the age of like 5 or 6. I live in a house with a bunch of other kids in the church in Terrytown. And it was great to just see them and play with them. And, you know, we had our like plastic lightsabers, and, you know, we played tag or hide and seek in that building. And, you know, in that sense, it was a childhood like any other. You know, I just liked hanging out with my friends. But in another sense, there was always like this looming cloud of, you know, if the Moons came, or if any Korean leader authority came, you would have to like just straighten up. And, you know, it was kind of almost like this military thing. And we got bullied by like some of those people. So, you know, there was always that kind of lurking around the corner. But yeah, but in another sense, like I think probably the best thing about the church, I think most kids would say, would be like the summer camps or the winter workshops. We had something that was kind of almost like Bible camp. We would just, there was a property in Harriman State Park in New York where we called it Camp Sunrise. And, you know, it was like cabins and outhouses, and it was like living in the woods. And there would be like half the day was like lectures, and half the day was like basketball or like canoeing or capture the flag. So in that sense, it was a childhood like any other. We had those summer camp experiences. But anyway, God, the lectures were just, I think with all the intake of all the lectures I got in church and in school and even during the summer, there was like no escape from being educated and indoctrinated. Like I think that partially contributed or just stimulated my ADHD because it's hard for me to even read a book these days. I'm a very slow reader. I have to read over lines over and over again. My intake of information is, I know it's a little harder for me to focus. And anyway, well, if anyone from the medical field is watching this, probably like, because we have ADHD, dude, you got to like get medication or like go to classes or something. Anyway, but yeah, I do like Moon he was a billionaire, and he wanted to create this utopian society. So he did buy these like amazing properties that, you know, there was this one place called Berrytown in New York. It was in upstate New York near Red Hook. And it was, I think it used to belong to the Mormon church or something, but there was like a giant church, and there were like classrooms, and there were like these big fields, this, you know, total utopian kind of property. that has just gone on sale recently, actually. I think the church is kind of dwindling with their splinter groups now all kind of rivaling each other. It seems to be slowly fading out. But yeah, that's where we used to go to Camp Sunrise before Harriman State Park. And yeah, there was like a swimming pool, there was horseback riding. You know, I think Reverend Moon wanted to be like, you know, my people are going to be treated well. And, you know, so yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, like, I do have those happy memories. And so those are the hardest things to kind of take into account with the things I disagree with. And just the more scarier moments that shouldn't have been, like, you know, just the violent assertion of authority that we were faced with, and basically the shunning. If you didn't believe in the church, or if you had an opinion that didn't agree with the church, you were just completely shunned, like you didn't exist. So
certainly common in other cults. Jehovah's Witnesses, the Exclusive Brethren have something like that, and Scientology have Disconnection. So it seems to be a pretty common thing, doesn't it? There's this idea of shunning.
Yeah, I know Robert J. Lifton, he talks about in his book Thought Reform and Psychology of Totalism, I believe that's the name of the book. He talks about the dispensing of existence, where you don't exist if you don't believe, you know. And so yeah, and I've known people. I knew someone whose child was sexually molested by a priest, and I know that's a topic on the table these days. But he was in a different cult, and he had been in this cult for decades, and he said that when he came out with that information, they completely shunned him, and these friends he was friends with for decades just shut him off, and his family. And they had like a workshop where they talked about how wrong he was and what he tried to do to them, and how it was like an attack, just for saying that is, you know, for trying to protect his own child, which is yeah. And that's also goes into another thing that Robert J. Lifton talks about: doctrine over person, or doctrine over experience, basically. Yeah, where, you know, the doctrine of the faith is more valid than your life experience. So that's where things get scary.
Well, I think we'll wrap up there. So, Teddy, thank you very much indeed for coming back on to talk beliefs. And I'm sure it won't be the last time. People seem pretty interested in the Moonies, of course, and cults in general. I was thinking maybe next time we could talk about cults as a general topic. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know how much I've gone into that, or I don't know. It's a lot.
Comparing the cults that you know of to, like we just did now, you know,
oh, sure.
Like the shunning aspect and all these various aspects that you see in cults, like the shunning, obviously the mind control, anything like sleep deprivation. I don't know if that ever came into it, you know, and see if it ticks all the boxes. Yeah.
Oh, sleep deprivation. Yeah. I mean, just to go into that for a sec, like Sun Myung Moon, like he claimed to only sleep like maybe 10 minutes or something, or like 2 or 3 hours a night. But later I learned that people, narcissists and the like, they sleep less because like they constantly need attention, so they got to be awake for it. So anyway,
so they don't miss any of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but he would brag about that, and he would try to put that on us, and we used to talk about amongst each other, be like, "Oh, Father only sleeps 2 or 3 hours a night. We have to be like him." You know, like, yeah, it's just like we were ashamed to sleep. Like it was really. Well, there you go. There's just sleep deprivation, and like it felt good to know that. Oh, this is a problem. This is a thing that a lot of cults go through. Oh, thank God. Like this is something that's wrong, because like I like sleep. So damn it.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Excellent, Teddy. Thank you very much indeed. And we will catch up with you again very soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.